Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake, as if there's some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So once more, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there's some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So let's just take a comfortable seat. Feet flat on the floor. Just feeling the soles of your feet resting on the floor. Shoulders back a little. Lengthening the neck. Placing your hands face up, if that feels comfortable, on your lap. In this position of openness. Softening the shoulders, letting them fall. Straightening the back a little, just a little bit. And then softening the belly. Just releasing everything. And then in the meditation, to release whatever else it is that you're holding up or holding on to. Easy sweep of breath. The inhale rising to 4 counts. Exhale, falling to 5 counts. that fifth count, always that last huff, so that if you're taking in the suffering of others in Tonglen and then you're letting it go, it's fully released with that last second of breath. And now we're in it. Now we're in it. Just relaxing the muscles of the face. This is the moment the landscape listens. Shadows hold their breath. Just stepping back from the thoughts and the emotions. That particular coil that we so identify with. That's me, right? Just stepping back from that and gazing with wonder. Just taking a little step back from the body, that coil, that aggregate, which we so identify with. Gazing with wonder. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there's some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. and miles to go before I sleep. This is, for me, the poem about meditative practice. I wanted to place you at the edge of those woods, outside of the woods, gazing in, when I ask you to look at the coil of thoughts and emotions, or the coil of the body, or in other meditations, the coil of perceptions. Am I sure? Am I really sure about these things I believe are true? Or the samskara, the conditionings that led us to believe we are who we are. This self that we so identify with. All of these coils that make up the meanness that we present to the world. This poem is about stepping outside of that meanness, just at the edge, and looking in. And I saved it for December because it was published in 1923. It was probably written the previous year, or even in 1921. But it was published in 1923, and this is its 100-year anniversary. And you'll notice that this stopping is happening without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. So we could say that it's December 21st, 1923, almost exactly 100 years ago, that this poem is set to happen in. And of course, we know Robert Frost for his plain-spoken poetry. Robert Frost is one of those rare poets who has many poems that have landed and firmly rooted themselves into American consciousness and into our literary tradition. Not just one or two, but many, many poems, and this is just one of them. But why is this poem still talked about 100 years later? Why is it so memorable? In part, there's a formal grace to this. Frost's plain-spoken talk was not just your average diction. He wrote with what was called, by him, I believe, memorable speech. The speech part is clear. All of the diction is the kinds of words that we would use in everyday conversation. It's just everyday speech, honoring an American idiom. But what's memorable about this, first of all, is that it's the wonderful command of form. The rhyme in these poems is doing what the speaker of the poem is doing. It's stopping and moving on. You have this know, though, snow in the first stanza, and then this little interruption here, which then hooks into the next stanza, queer, near, and year. And then a little interruption, lake, which hooks into the next one, shake, mistake, and flake. And then the third interruption, sweep, which hooks into the last stanza. And the poem closes, like Ezra Pound says, as a well-made box would close, just with that third sleep. What a surprise that arrives in the last stanza, when now we're expecting the interruption. The surprise comes in there not being one. And the traveler continues on. So formally, it's magnificent. Form and content are in a very rich and deep conversation here. The traveler has been interrupted on the road, stops, looks into the woods, and then travels on. And Frost himself was asked about this poem. I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but it said that he was asked about this poem once, and he said, well, it's about someone staring into the woods, stopping by woods and moving on. He refused to attach any symbolic or metaphorical meaning to the poem. And yet there are a lot of readings possible here. When I teach this poem to my students, The first stanza offers us about 20 minutes of conversation, because you could read this poem from a neo-historicist point of view, looking at the moment in history when it was written and saying how it's a reflection of that time. This is after World War I. Western culture is suddenly a wasteland. We're thinking about all of the rich contributions of philosophy and science and this quest for reason that we attach to Western thinking and intellectual life. And where did it take us? It got us to World War I with trench warfare and gas attacks and aerial bombardment and all of these technological advances, which helped us to easier kill each other. So the lost generation that followed World War I were trying to figure out what all this was for. What is all this art and culture and reason and science and philosophy even for, if this is where it's taking us? So there's this stopping and gazing into oblivion that's happening, I think, collectively among artists, especially at that time. And you could also read it as a psychoanalytical treatment of the mind. Whose woods these are, I think I know. Whose woods these are, I think I know, to me, is a little bit like the dreamer remembering he's dreaming in the middle of the dream. Here I am in these woods. I think I know whose woods these are. These woods are my woods. This is the unconscious world. My house is in the village, though. My conscious life involves getting up in the morning and going to work and pretending that all of this is separate. But at night, I remember all of this is me. All of this is an extension of me and looking back at me in disguise. Whose woods these are, I think I know. And even though my house is in the village, and even though that conscious part of me is not aware that I'm stopping here, looking into the woods, I have this insight that all of it is me looking back at me in disguise. It's a mystical moment. And then this horse, which is the body and the heart and the mind, saying, hey, it's dangerous out here. We have to keep moving. We have to get back on the road and go where we're meant to go. Life has a purpose and life has a meaning, and we have to do things. But there's this other part that's standing outside of the body and the thoughts and the emotions and perceptions and saying, no. The real stuff of life is in this stopping. It's in honoring this interruption. The real meat of life is this interruption itself. And then at the end of the poem, we hook back into the sweep of life. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep and miles to go before I sleep. I guess the last thing I'll say here is that that first miles to go before I sleep is the world reminding us that we have things to do. Let's get back on the road. And the second miles to go is all about radical acceptance. It's about saying yes to what we're told we must do. I must do it. Okay, I'll do it. But heaven, paradise, comes in only when we say absolutely 100% terrifically yes to it. And that second repetition to me is the most important one. It's the one where the self decides to return to the world in service. So let's get back into the meditation and see how we can apply this to a cold morning in December in 2023. Lengthening the breath. 3 counts in. 4 counts out. Taking this moment to pause, to touch the holy. Standing just on the edge of those woods of the self. Watching the thoughts fall like snow, passing before our eyes and then just disappearing onto the forest floor. You might hear the body saying, there are things to do today. What are you doing just sitting around? Shaking its little bell. But you're standing apart from that. You might hear your family saying, this is not the kind of thing that we do. And for just 30 minutes, you're stepping apart from that. The snow in the woods is like the light in Emily Dickinson. When it comes, the landscape listens. Shadows hold their breath. And here the woods are lovely, dark and deep. This is awareness arriving. And you realize that's who you are. Your house is in the village, but this is really who you are. Everything else is impermanence now. Softening the belly. Keeping those breaths at 4 counts in, 5 counts out. Just relaxing and releasing everything that you're holding. Stopping by woods on a snowy evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harnessed bells a shake to ask if there's some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. And miles to go before I sleep. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Have a wonderful December morning.
Thank you so much, David, and everyone. You too. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank you, David. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you all.
Thank you.